Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have our usual suspects of AD or Alpha Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And Dean, what are we doing here today?
Well, first of all, hello everybody. Sorry about the delay. We had Spigs with a little jet lag last night, so he wasn't functional. So we had to plug him in and let him recharge. So it was one of them type things. But today we decided to be a little bit lighthearted and talk about Monte Cook's latest design journal article that he put up. It's called Shared Imaginary Space. The link is down below. It'll be over there around, or if you're on Discord or whatever, you'll find it there. But it's a pretty good article to talk about. So that's what we're going to deal with today. And it's all on you.
Yeah, for those, first off, hey, sorry about last week. I was in the Bahamas drinking a lot of pina coladas and wishing you were all there. But, like Dean said, I got back early yesterday morning and I needed to recharge my batteries and get ready for work and stuff, so we didn't record the episode for the last 2 weeks, but we're recording today. So I'm happy that we're back to talk gaming. I kind of miss chatting with you guys about gaming. Well, one good thing about my vacation is I finally got to finish reading Tolus, so next week we'll start our breakdown of Tolus, breakdown and review, which is going to be cool. But today's about shared imaginary spaces, guys. Monte Cook has put up, I think, 4 articles now on his blog post.
4 or 5 of the design journals.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I not only if you're a game designer, or even if you just play a lot of RPGs, he's dropping jewels, yo. You really got to check it out. I think every article adds something new to how to think about games. So I encourage everyone to actually check out his blog post, because, like I said, I'm really enjoying reading these. And we didn't have a topic, but Dean suggested we talk about this article in particular, and it was a great idea because there's a lot of jewels in this one.
And I would just say to everybody, subscribe to it. I get it every time he puts one out. It comes directly to my email. It's flagged. It's perfect, so you don't miss them. Subscribe to this. It is free. It, like Anthony said, it's awesome. As a designer myself, writer, the whole nine, it adds so much worth and so much merit to, what you're going to be doing and how you view the entire the entire venue, So I think this is going to be a great talk.
Yeah. So first off, what is a shared imaginary space? And how did Monte Cook define it?
Well, Monte he didn't define it specifically, but he described it in so many broad strokes, where he talked about, is it just sitting around when you play as a kid, and it's the pirate, kids being pirates, and, but basically one kid will say, I did this, the other kid say, I did that, and then the argument ensues. So with thinking about it from an RPG aspect, we had to add in, that's why we added in some rules and some mechanics. But it's this place that we describe the world together. It's this place that we all at the table delve into, and it allows us to tell these stories, and experience these grand moments together. So that's the basis of it.
I believe one way he put it in the article was it's unreal things happening to unreal people in an unreal place or something, just basically maintaining that it's like an imaginary space.
I think he does actually define it in the article. Exactly what you're saying now. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say that. And another big part of the definition was it's imaginary space that we all contribute to and affect. Like what I say will affect what's going on in another player's or the GM's mind about what's going on in this imaginary shared space. And that's another big, part of role-playing games, is sharing and contributing to and changing that imaginary shared space.
Well, like it's the way the language, it's the way it's written, because right here I'm looking at it. It says, If a game or activity creates a shared imaginary space that all those involved experience and contribute to, as Al was just saying, it's a role-playing game. Specifically, if you and I are playing a game and we both are imagining the same unreal place filled with the same unreal people doing things that we're both contributing to each other's vision of all that, we're playing a role-playing game. And he defined it within the realm of role-playing. So
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah, I love the analogy he gives of kids playing pretend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people like to use that as a definition or a way of explaining what a role-playing game is, which I think is sort of like a cop-out almost. You know, like, oh, it's like pretend. Role-playing games really isn't. I think pretend is a game you play with your friends or improv, right? But it has no rules. A role-playing game has rules that kind of like bind.
It has structure.
Yeah, binds the pretend together. It has structure correctly, right? So, you know, I think he was touching at not only shared imaginary space, but in some ways he was attempting or accomplishing helping define exactly what an RPG is, right? You know, so like what makes or what's the definition of an RPG? Because I think shared imaginary spaces, you know, as a player and the GM, and the definition of an RPG have to go hand in hand, if that makes any sense.
I've been defining an RPG as interactive storytelling for a long, long time, you know, and that's what I say it is. It's when you and I tell a story together. You know, you get to be the stars of the story, or the you know the antagonist, the protagonist in a grand tale, and I get to be the guy who sets the stage, and I get to be the guy who comes up with your antagonist, and so on and so forth. But we tell a story together, so interactive storytelling.
And I mean, I break it down even further to something like how I explained role playing games to my stepdaughter when I introduced her to No Thank You Evil. It was like, we're going to tell a story together. I'm going to be the storyteller. You're going to be the main character of the story. And we're going to use dice and rules to figure out what happens when you try to do stuff. And that's literally, and then I told her, like, you know, we'll have little toys or whatnot, you know, minis, because we do have a bunch of little toys that we use for this. And but I told her, for the most part, we're going to be making pretend. You're going to think about what's happening. We're not going to have a little piece of paper for everything. We're not going to have drawings for everything. We did have a map, like, of a general area, whatever, I forget what she said, some puppy pal, like, airport map or something she liked to use. But I told her that's not super important. It's mostly going to take place, you know, we're going to talk about it and describe it, and we're going to tell a story together. And yeah, she got it, like, you know, pretty much right away.
You know, that's sort of like the kicker, right? Because when you describe something, like the three of us could, like, I could say, hey, you walk into a large ballroom with a crystal chandelier, you know, hanging up top in the center of the room, and below it is a water fountain, you know, a water fountain in the shape of a mermaid, and the mouth of the fountain is you know, the water is cascading down from the mermaid's mouth, right? We can all picture it, like just what I said, it's short, simple, sweet, but the three of us will imagine it differently.
Yes.
Right.
And he touches on that. He touches on just that fact, which is which I think is another beautiful aspect of the article, you know, because we do a lot of theater of the mind. And, you know, those of us who do theater of the mind, we also know the benefit of props, you know, so sometimes you will use a prop, like, you know, and you like to use pictures when we're online, lots of imagery, and things of that nature, you know. So having that shared imaginary space and being able to define those aspects, but not necessarily everybody seeing the same vision of it, you know, is one of the most magical portions of it. It is really magical that we can all have a different vision but still come to the same outcomes. Because
but do you think it's important that the vision has to be somewhat cohesive amongst, in between all our minds. Because if not, if you have a table of 5 people and they all seeing exactly different things, seeing the same scene totally different, it can complicate things, right?
Right, but that's what I'm saying. That's where your job as the GM, that's where it becomes very important for your descriptions to have enough information that there is a cohesion there. When you think about like the last time we played GM roulette, and Claire was describing us in the gymnasium. I know I was seeing a different gymnasium than you in the setup of that gymnasium. I think I was looking at the gymnasium from Buffy, the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie. That was just a vision I saw in my mind, where you could have been thinking about the gym from Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yeah.
But we were able to orient ourselves in the sense of, okay, there's those big double doors. We have to get through those doors. The crowd is coming towards us. These are the things. So you have to make sure your descriptions basically lead people into the same cohesive moment, as opposed to worrying about everybody seeing the exact same room in the theater of the mind.
So to piggyback off that a little bit, Jason in the chat is making a point that I was basically going to follow up with, was as long as the pieces they need to act on are understood, the rest can be different. And yeah, that's exactly it. And that's the beauty of Cypher System. Like it comes in general terms, like short, medium, whatever. I'm blanking on the immediate,
Right,
short, long.
Yeah.
But either way, what I was getting at is, as long as the main parts of the room or whatever is being described are detailed enough, like let's go back to Anthony's example, the ballroom with the crystal chandelier at the top with the mermaid statue in the middle, or the fountain in the middle underneath it. Players might be picturing the statue differently, or they might be picturing the water coming out in a different way or something. Like, that's inconsequential. And then on top of that, like, he set up the important parts to what we have to assume are the important parts for the story or what they need to do. If there's anything additional that a player wants to look for, this is where the role-playing game part comes. It's like, hey, are there any chairs in the room? They'll ask the GM. Or, hey, is there any X in the room? They'll ask these questions, and it kind of further builds that imaginary space, because now you're fleshing out these smaller details. Like, again, are there chairs? Is there a bowl of punch on a table nearby? When I think of a ballroom, I think of like maybe someone setting up for a party. So these are things that come into my mind, but they might not be actually present as per the GM. So that's me as a player would bring it up. You as a GM, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you're absolutely right, but that's for a specific kind of role-playing game, right? Cypher System will be one of those games that falls under that category. But then you have the other role-playing game that's going to give you the map. They're going to give you, and they'll show you exactly what's in the room, right? So it'll have this is what, the entire group is seeing the same image, right? And something like Cypher System is like what Dean says, is changing your mindset, right? Something like Cypher System, right, is going to have it more of a shared, like the room is going to be more shared throughout the entire group, because they're going to do exactly what you just said, Al. They're going to say, hey, are there chairs in the room? Matter of fact, there are chairs in the room, is there a door leading out of this? No, there isn't a door leading out of it. So it's like give and take between the GM and the players to build out this particular scene. Something like that's more grid-based, you don't have to go through those steps.
Well, that's what Monty addresses. That he addresses the concept, like we were talking about, the shared imaginary space versus those people who have the more strict mechanics. Where you're looking at the distance. Okay, this is 30 feet. And he makes a great point that if you sat down with, let's just say 4 different people, their concept of time isn't going to be the same. 8 seconds, people are not going to realize how much could be done in 8 seconds because they don't look at life like that. Or they're not going to be able to judge, 30 feet, because that's not the life they live. So that's why he said he used more general terms: immediate, short, long, so on and so forth.
I love when in the article when Monty said that he spoke about a different game that he's working on, but I do that. I use this concept that he was talking about in the article in Cypher System. I don't view time as in seconds, minutes, and hours. I view time in scenes because I view Cypher. I think Cypher System works best if it's done in a cinematic style. We spoke about this many times before, but I view every scenario as a scene, like it would be in a movie, or it would be on a television show, or it would be a chapter in a book. So I don't view it. The time takes as long as the scene takes. So some scenes could go, 10 minutes. Some scenes could go 2 hours.
Right. And the reality is, if you think about it, even in a movie, there are times that the scene will take, let's say, 30 seconds on screen time, but in suppose real time, or within the side of the movie, it's an hour, it's 2 hours, or something like that, because they'll shift back and forth. And Cypher System, I think, has taught all of us to kind of use that methodology when you're telling your stories. Because yes, definitely, I just look at it, how many scenes am I going to try to have in a game, and the time frames are manipulated as necessary.
I'm just laughing because of there's one super funny example of this is in Dragon Ball Z, like when they're fighting on Planet Namek and it's gonna blow up. They say it's gonna take like an hour or whatever, 30 minutes, and they're fighting for like 10 episodes. So like, it's like they definitely stretch out the scene to fit out their narrative, even though it's only taking 30 minutes within the show. It's actually, we see 10 episodes, like, it's way more than 30 minutes.
Oh yeah, and that was one of the things that you made the perfect point out, because that used to drive me so crazy that they're powering up for like 4 episodes. It's like 4 episodes of them talking back and forth, and wah, you're like,
and it would have been like 2 minutes in the show had passed, basically.
Great point.
It's easier to accomplish accomplish that style of scene structure when you're playing theater of the mind than it is when you're playing with a grid and a map. Yeah. Because it's when the players have a lot more input in what's actually happening in the scene and what the surroundings are, right? You could give a lot more leeway in, okay, it took you 40 seconds, or it took you a minute to run from one end of this long hallway to the other, or it took you 30 seconds to climb this fountain, right? But if you have everything structured, like this is exactly what you see, everyone sees the exact same thing, everyone knows, okay, I moved 5 squares, this is my turn, this is how many squares it's going to take me to get from one thing. So then you can actually quantify that in time measurements. But in theater of the mind, everyone's thinking, it's like what Dean said earlier, everyone has a different viewpoint.
Right. And I think, and it's not a bad thing. It really isn't, because everybody's experiences are different. But having the guidelines we have, like the brilliance of saying that it's an immediate distance, and you say an immediate distance is anything you can reach out and touch around you. And then you go short distance is any distance that you can walk, in the space of a round. You can move this distance and act. So you basically have eliminated the need to answer the big question of, well, how far is it? Guess what? It's in the short range. You can make that, and you can do whatever you need to do. So whatever the person is thinking, if that person thinks they can make it 60 feet across a room and, do a backflip and everything else, guess what? They did 60 feet. You might be like, okay, yeah, he really can only go like 10 or 15 feet, but it doesn't matter.
That style of gameplay also does have some pitfalls, though.
Absolutely.
Because, like one of the ones that come up a lot is, most players are gonna shoot for or at least me as a player. I don't want to categorize everybody, but most players are gonna want to shoot for the moon, right? They're gonna want to say, hey, I want to run over there, leg kick this guy, then get up, take 2 steps back, and laugh, ha 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 ha, right? and you allow one player to do that, and then the next player takes it slightly further. And by the end of the round, if you're one of those yes GMs, right, the whole concept of 8 seconds goes out the window. So when you have a structured amount of movement, right, you know that it's even fair across the board.
Oh yeah.
Right? And I think Monty put it best when he said there's a difference. There's people that love to play solely for story and people who play for the challenge, right? And I think people who tend to play for the challenge want a little more structure. So
they want more mechanics. They want more mechanics. They want to define every aspect of what's going on around them.
But that's not a bad thing.
No, listen,
it's a different style of game. That's all.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, I played those games. I played that game. I was that game master for a long time. I just realized that I actually kind of enjoyed the story more. I enjoy, finding Cypher System. I realized the cinematic style of telling stories is exactly like my wheelhouse. That's what I dig. But it's not to say I never had fun playing those other games, or even now, some of my friends I might play with. Just not to say I don't have fun when I play them either, because like you said, just a different style, just a different experience.
Infinite Construct said something really cool. They said that's so you can measure the challenge and mathematically demonstrate the challenge. That's an excellent way of stating it. So my question to you guys is, what category do you fall into?
You mean the people out there in the world? Because I just told you.
The way Monty defined it, playing solely for the story or playing for the challenge.
You know what? I think it's kind of both. I think it's a little bit of both.
Me too. I think for me personally, because I think playing solely for the story is improv.
Right.
Like you need some sort of like challenge and structure.
Right. Exactly. I mean, the whole thing, like with Cypher System, is like, since Tallest has come out, and I've been looking at my big old map over there, and just various different things, and I'm going, man, I really want to sit around a table like the old days and throw a big ass battle map on the table and pull out some of these minis and stuff, but I want to play it Cypher style. I want to be like,
I ain't gonna lie. While I was in Bahamas, I started drawing out some maps because my Tallest one shot is I'm breaking out the grid. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Like I said, I got a Tallest one shot coming up too. So
am I gonna have to make one too now? Like,
you better. But you better get on there, man. Get in.
So basically, what Infinite Construct said just there, Cypher, is that really sweet balance between the two. That's exactly what I was gonna say. I kind of push it a little bit further though, or I'm trying to push it a little bit further with my Darkest Dungeon homebrew. I've been working on that on the side a little bit every now and then. But so that becomes, if you've played that game, Darkest Dungeon, it's all about making the best of a bad situation, meaning it's extremely challenging. Cypher doesn't, at its base, is not that challenging, so you have to add in the stuff from Darkest Dungeon, where again, I enjoy that aspect. Like, I enjoy seeing, even if let's say if I was the player playing this homebrew, I would enjoy seeing myself overcoming, getting critted on, getting lasting damage, getting, blighted or, bled or whatever. I would find a lot of fun in that. But on top of that, the story is also super fun. Like, I don't like a straight dungeon crawl. Like, if that's all we're doing is crawling around dungeons with no interaction with some story element, like, that's not fun to me either. Like, there has to be some sort of, like, a little plot element as to why we're in there. Maybe even a plot element has to happen within the dungeon, or there has to be elements, there has to be a heavy element of outside dungeon role-playing happening as well.
No. But
I'm gonna give you a little insight.
I don't think I got that from playing solely for story. I think what Monty means about solely for story is not the like overall narrative of the adventure, right? But the interaction between the characters, the more story of your individual character, like motivations, goals, reaching. Because every RPG, no matter, even dungeon crawls have an overarch like plot line, right? it's not necessarily the overall story, but it's more the interaction between characters, between NPCs. You know, like they want personal growth of their character.
Yeah, no, that's
So,
what I mean. Like
yeah.
outside of the dungeon, that stuff needs to be happening for me to be fully
Yeah.
engaged. Like
And-
that's
and I
how
was
you
gonna say-
just start find it better. But yes,
I was going to say something to you, Al, too. Believe it or not, it's kind of funny you even brought it up. There's a huge challenge in Cypher System, but it's you don't get to see it all the time, 'cause especially with us running a lot of one shots. But with your Darkest Dungeon, you bring that element in, and the challenge in Cypher System is resource management. You don't see it in most one shots because the one shot happens, and it's self-contained. But if you're playing a longer a longer campaign or whatever, you can really bring that tension, and you can really bring those elements that, okay, I got to manage my resources, or I'm not going to be working very well. You with your Darkest Dungeon and playing what you did, the mechanics that you bring in, which don't offset anything about Cypher, just makes it awesome. It's a fun 2-3 hour 4 hour experience, and that's literally what it is. Because like I said, when I played Darkest Dungeon, I was tripping because it was like, oh my god, what am I gonna do? Whew, okay, I gotta keep going. So it was that challenge. It's cool.
and I will say that it's
you
gotten
brought up-
deadlier. Just spoiler alert, it's gotten deadlier.
You brought up a good point. It does have a long-term narrative challenge, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it has that tactical, like, scene challenge that you normally get from a lot of traditional D20 based RPGs.
Oh yeah, no, and that's exactly what I'm saying. That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, because the system mastery, the system, the advancement system, it all coincides with the narrative more than a lot of games that the challenge comes from the tactical.
Right.
It's almost
the
like
challenge in other games
combat.
comes from the challenge in other games come from understanding the mechanics and how you can manipulate the mechanics to your advantage.
Yes.
Where in this one, in Cypher, it's learning to engage the narrative to manipulate, your back and forth. So yeah,
it's actually manipulate the narrative to get, it's they both bring different challenges. It's just a different style of challenge.
Right. And in a different approach, because you think about it. Prime example would be using your edge and effort is one of those things, because you're manipulating the narrative. How easy is it going to be for me to complete this particular task?
Yes.
And let's just say we reduce the task to a 0. You myself, Al, we all do it. That's when we hand the narrative over to the player character. Okay, well, tell me what that looks like. Or if they roll a 20, tell me what go at it. And those are those back and forth. But again, too much of that, we've had a few one shots where people have been walking away with 2 points left in might, or they didn't drop down on the damage track, and somebody else gave them a healing cipher or something like that in order to pull them back up. But those are those cool moments, and I think that's an aspect of what Cypher System is that really they're just really cool.
And
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Cypher adds so much to the narrative. Like, it gives you so many tools, not only as a GM, but as a player, to build on this narrative together, right? But I also could see, like, just to play the devil's advocate, I could see how a traditional gamer would not find what the three of us find enjoyable, find a positive.
Oh yeah.
Cypher System, or in Fate, or most of the narrative games.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I was just think about when we played Eric's D&D. We played the 5e game. We had a blast, but in the same breath, had to shift how I approached it, because it's like, wait a minute, I got to try to maximize certain things along the line here, and I got to go from a mechanical standpoint. Al, which was so cool, said, "To hell with it. I'm still going from a narrative standpoint. My character is this," and he took hindrances, but those hindrances added something too, which was really cool as well. So
Yeah, but you see, you can still be mechanical, like playing your like the concept, right? That D&D isn't narrative is not true at all.
Oh no, that's not true at all. I know that.
Like any RPG can be played narratively, right? It's just that Cypher System and Fate give you more tools. Like the mechanics they do have coincide with directly affecting the narrative.
Right.
Other games don't necessarily do that, right? The mechanics they give you directly affect the efficiency of one's character.
Right.
Or
that's what it is.
In Al's character, the deficiency of his character.
And that's what I'm saying. That's what I was getting to. I mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said it. I'm saying nothing's wrong. I mean, we played D&D narratively for years. But the other side of the coin was we knew when it came time to roll those dice, you wanted to have certain things in place because you wanted certain things to happen, and that's what I'm saying as far as looking at the mechanics. And then, again, to go a step further, there are those people out there that play it truthfully solely as if it were, a collectible card game, a tactical card game. They want to minimize their deficiencies and maximize, their talents. I mean, and if you really want to be, talk about it, 4E was that example. 4E was nothing. It was beautifully built. It went back to the roots, and it went back to the ideas of being on a grid and playing miniatures and so on and so forth. It was done well for that.
I will say though, and you guys have played it in a game of mine. I think pretty much almost every game of mine implements this. But what I was getting at is you can, even though it's not in it by raw, I think it's an optional rule that says you can use a map or grids or whatever. That general areas map that I use, like it's like 3x3 like squares or circles or whatever, and they each represent a general area, and there's tokens, and you have to figure out how far you can move based on your distances based on Cypher System. That still, again, at least to me and to people who have tried it, say it has that tactical element to it, because now you're worrying about how far you can go to do things before you can accomplish a certain task, and I just like that Cypher System gives you that opportunity to, if you want to do it, you can include it, and it doesn't detract from the base mechanics of Cypher System. There's still narrative at play. You can get that best of both worlds so easily within Cypher System. I think that's all I want to say. Just that Cypher System does so well.
You put up a good point. Let's. I know this is a little off topic, but let's touch on that, right? What's the definition of tactical? Because from what I'm seeing, like, just tell me if I'm wrong, right? What I'm seeing is in like the way you envision it is that there's better definition of what a character is capable of. Is that how you view tactical?
Yes, if that's the end of the question, yes.
Yeah.
So what to me tactical means is that there's a very defined set distance people can move. There's not a grid, but at least a mapped quantifiable way to say, hey, in my iteration in Cypher System, moving from one square to another square is an immediate, moving 2 is a short, moving 3 is a long. If it's quantifiable, yes, I think that's what the definition of tactical.
Where everyone can see
everyone can see, everyone, there's no the only reason I would say this is a little less tactical than what I do than within D&D or whatever, where there's very precise 5-foot measurement, is that within each of those immediate area distance, whatever square circles, that's where it gets a little more loose. That's where it's you can maybe place your token where you want on there, but it's going to be a little more ill-defined, because that's where more action is taking place. It's not as precise. This is, again, more general. And then within each area, it becomes more ciphery, if that makes sense, whereas you're talking more loose definitions about where you are within this area.
I'll give you...
Well, go ahead.
No, when you get done, I was just going to give you an example of exactly what you're saying, what I've done at conventions.
But yeah, just that defines tactical for me. Just that if you can quantify how far you can move, how many actions you can take within your turn, that's tactical to me. It doesn't really matter like what you call it, where there's super precise rulings, whereas like Warhammer-ish, like that's very high-end tactical, right? There's definitely degrees and spectrums within the tactical. What I'm describing, how I do Cypher System, is definitely on the lower end. D&D would be like the middle, I guess, or maybe higher end, and then there's the extremes of like Warhammer and like Starfire. What is it? What's that X-Wing game? That Star Wars minis game. There's like super.
Oh, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Star Wars.
That's one where it's like that's tactical to the extreme. Like that's. But again, it's all tactics to me.
So that's when you pull out your laser pointers and your rulers.
Yeah, exactly. That's to the extreme.
So let me bring it back to the original article. Can you have shared imaginary spaces within a tactical environment?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I think you would have an even more defined shared imaginary space because there are markers. There are ratified spaces. So like if you say the door is right there and you like we were talking about, like I was saying how I did with running a D&D game at a con. I had a battle map, I had it drawn out so people could see the room. Now of course I had to describe it because it was just lines, like a blueprint. But then I go, okay, well, the walls are vaulted and they're covered in, they're covered, they're stone walls, but they're covered with tapestries. And these tapestries are just depicting all of this. But guess what? You know exactly where the door is. And now you got an idea of the tapestries on the walls but you know where every pillar is in the room. So everybody's imagination may be seeing a different tapestry or envision it this way, where they might see the stonework differently. But guess what? Everybody knows exactly where those spaces are, where they can move through, where the door is that they have to get out of. So
and the shared imaginary space could also include the actual tactics of the characters themselves, combining abilities, to create cool and new, using the environment, because now everyone sees the environment the same, but now they can utilize their abilities to interact with the environment as a group. Right. Which directly affects the narrative.
And I think that's the beauty of Cypher because of the simplicity. When you add in a little more complexity, it's never overwhelming. You don't have to overwhelm your players, because literally what I did was, like, the squares on the battle map was cool. I made one square was solid immediate distance. Anything within one square, because to me that was being able to take a step. They could take a step and move into any square around them. So that was immediate distance. Short distance was 3 squares away. Anything 3 squares away. And they caught on so quick. Nobody was asking me about, how was it 30 feet, 40 feet? They knew.
3 squares. You know what I'm saying? Like there was no feet definite. It was just 3 squares, which is really nice.
3 squares. They were, boom, I'm good,
Yeah, but you said Cypher System, but what you're describing is D&D.
So what? All right. So what he's.
But I was running.
No. I understand what you're saying, but the element that why no one was asking those questions is what D&D brings to the table. You know what I mean?
There. I was gonna say I had a point to make, and now I'm blanking on it. Fuck. It was that. All right, so just harking back to what Dean was saying about your question, Anthony, about can tactical still be shared imaginary space, right? So like Dean was saying, everything is plotted out, so everyone does have a idea about where these pillars are, where these tapestries are, where these paintings are. But what's actually on the paintings, again, the stonework, is up to interpretation. And on top of that, even though, and this is basically what you were saying, how players can interact with each other or the environment, that is where the shared space comes in, the imaginary space. They can shoot off their spells at their surroundings. They can also very much describe what they're doing physically if they're not trying to interact with the environment. They might say, hey, I do a roll off this table and then I slash with the momentum. Like, that's adding to the shared imaginary space. You're adding cinematics to it. So even though it's all very set in stone what your characters can move and do and whatnot, it's still abstract to a point, because you're not watching a fighter fight a goblin or whatever. You're watching a token move and then a dice being rolled. So the player can still very cinematically describe what they're doing as they move and take their action.
And just harkening back to the one last thing you said too, Anthony, the difference of giving them, defining short as short distance and short, and long distance, the way I described them, the difference would be that you're still not having to worry about people, for example, Magic Missile has a 120-foot range, but Ray of Frost only has a 60-foot range. So you don't have to do that. You can go, guess what? This has a short range. This one has a long range or a very long range. And boom, boom. Anything that has a very long range falls into this category. Anything that has a short range falls into this category. I'm not calculating.
I really like that, because it's like you're marrying the two systems or the two styles of gameplay into a mixture of the best part of both of them. That's really cool. I really like that.
Right, and that's what that's what I'm saying. This is Dungeons and Dragons, and that type of fantasy play, especially when you start crawling through the dungeons, those parts become really cool. Those parts kind of add a little element. And if I don't have to, go crazy with it, it makes the story flow, and, I've actually had players at the table, they'll go, I want to fire my onslaught, and, I'm like, okay. And of course, we know Onslaught has long range, and, they're like, okay. And I love it. Like, like we said, they'll reduce the difficulty down to a 0. So they just get, and I'm like, well, what does it look like? And the one guy was like, oh yeah, well, when I fired the Onslaught, it streaks down the hall and it kind of skips off one of the corners and it hits its target, stuff like that. Whereas they said, if I just said it was a 60-foot range on it, they're trying to get a ruler out and just measure, and they're not being cool with the descriptions and stuff like that. I've seen that happen.
I don't necessarily agree with that, because it's like going back to saying that you can't be descriptive in playing D&D.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I've just noticed that people become they become a lot of people, not everyone, becomes a lot more linear in their thought process.
It definitely adds limitations, having those strict, like, 60-foot, whatever feet measurements. Is like, hey, they'll have this cool idea in mind, and then they'll look at the graph paper and be like, oh shit, it's 5 feet too far, and now I can't do it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of
a creative player saying, like, just to like debunk that like argument, right? A creative player is saying, I'm running forward, and as I'm running forward, I'm mumbling the words of my spell, and then I'm casting.
I'm a release,
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. But
it goes back to what I was saying about the shared imaginary space in your descriptions,
right?
In your actions, like you can still accomplish those things. Like what I'm trying to get rid of is the stigma that there's somehow that the narrative games and the tactical games can't be like they
can't be married together.
Oh no, they definitely can be. 100% can be married.
I've said this.
If one game is somehow better than the other.
Oh, no, I don't agree with that either.
What I've said about Cypher System is as complex as you want it to be. It really is, because of how MCG Monte Cook designed everything about the game. It's really as complicated or as tactical, or whatever word you want to use, complex as you make it, because there's nowhere in the book that says you can't define, your distances, and you can't define this, that, and the third. And so if you want to do that, boom, you can marry that right in, but you're still playing Cypher, and that
I
was
mean,
I
okay,
think that was the thing that was just the thing that drew me in once I start realizing the elegance of it. That's why I always say it's a simple system, but it's elegant. You know,
speaking of Cypher System, right? What mechanics facilitate the shared imaginary space? Like what I know we touched on distance. Are there any other mechanics that come to mind that be like, hey, this is absolutely there to encourage players to share, imaginary space together?
Minor,
effort,
major effects,
effort and edge,
player intrusions.
player GM intrusions, all of that. Yeah, I mean, I
How
think
do they like let's talk about intrusions. How do intrusions, which is kind of obvious, but let's like state the obvious for those that are new, haven't played Cypher System, or new to Cypher System and gonna watch this on YouTube.
a
It's
character, a player intrusion, or a GM intrusion is something that is directly affecting the narrative. Now, 90% of the time, depending on how you do it and how it's supposed to be done, player intrusions are personal. They're things that affect that moment within the space and time of the game. And so much so, and it's also very personal to the character, whether the character knows somebody or has an asset or something that they didn't have that wasn't written on their character sheet, or just a moment where GM intrusion affects the narrative. The GM intrusion can have long lasting effects. You can introduce a moment in the game with a GM intrusion, and now, like one of my favorite ones is the example I used where I had the NPC. The players rolled a one, got my GM intrusion. His intrusion was to throw the player off, but then this NPC, it became a reoccurring NPC in the game because of the situation.
I
So it's
mean, that defines intrusion, but how does it affect the shared imaginary space between the players?
well, first you asked me to define it, so.
No, I mean define how. I meant, you know what I meant. I meant how do they relate to each other? Like when I asked the question, you guys just said intrusions without a follow up.
It's pretty. What is it? Like you said, it's pretty straightforward. When you include an intrusion, I should say, whether as a player or a GM, you're directly changing the narrative, and that's directly changing the shared imaginary space. Something new is happening within the story, whether you as the player are changing or as a GM, something within the imaginations of the players or people at the table is going to change. So that not intrinsically, whatever, inherently changes the shared imaginary space. And it's a mechanic. It's something that's actually like you roll a dice, you spend XP, like it's something that's built into the game. It's not just us role playing to change the shared imaginary space. It's an actual mechanic that does it.
Yeah.
And I'll piggyback. I'll piggyback on what Al
gave the answer that I was thinking of. I'll just read it verbatim, but it says, give us a good framework for defining shared space. GM and players get to declare an aspect of the narrative, and the rule makes it canon that everyone now has to share. So like if I GM intrude and say, hey, this stream, has piranhas in it, right?
No,
as a GM, right? And then a player intrudes. Yeah, it has piranhas in it, but they all baby piranhas that their teeth haven't grown in, right? That's now a canon that this stream it's the baby piranha stream, and now everyone has to follow that same narrative. And I think that was I was thinking the same thing that Claire was thinking. That
but I did say that. I mean, when I had the NPC, intrude, block the character's thing, and then he became a reoccurring person. He really wasn't that in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Every character has to, essentially. But the point I was trying to make is that every character, not just the individual player, but whatever the intrusion is, becomes canon for every player at the table.
Right. Yeah. There's literally somebody that the rest of the party had to contend with over and over again, because he became a major player and not a throwaway. you know, things like that. Or prime example, like I said when I was saying that the person might have a contact. So you know what, you didn't set them up. They get to the door of a nightclub. They're trying to get in, and the bouncer is like, no. They fill their let's just say they fill their interaction roles, their pleasant interaction, and then somebody goes, you know what, I'm dropping XP, and I know the previous owner of the club, and they name drop. Oh, okay, so now that's everybody gets to come into the club. You know, things like that. So it's all of those things. You know, Claire said it, you said it, Al said it. I think we were all just saying the same thing with kind of different words. But
now effort and edge, how does that operate as a shared imaginary space? Did you guys mention effort and edge?
I did. I mentioned it. I say effort and edge operate as a shared imaginary space for the simple fact those are defining aspects of a character. These are things these are things that are not quantifiable, but that's like, you know, prime example, if a character has edge, say in intellect, and you want to play that off like, you know what, he's a trivia buff, or he's very witty, he's quick on his feet, you know, or it defines aspects of the character that we all
how is that shared amongst the entire table?
Because the entire table kind of buys into it, especially when he starts using that ability to ramp down what's going on around him or around them. Everybody is buying into the fact that, oh, wait a minute, you know, Anthony over there, you know, that's the smart dude in the group. You know what? He knows something about a little something about everything, you know, and we defer to this person. You know, if you have a person in a group who's good at something like that, you kind of defer to them. And it's that's where, and then effort, the way effort is a shared imaginary space, that's basically a representation of basically in the real world when we know you reach down and, you know, you squirrel your energy to push beyond, you know. So I think those are those aspects like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I think that's more of a shared imaginary space mechanic. I think that's more an individual mechanic.
No, I think I can, to kind of define it a little better. It's kind of like if you're excuse me, if you're looking at a D&D game, and you can look at classes like paladin, the cleric, the whatever. They kind of define a shared imaginary space in that, hey, that's the tank. When the shit goes down, he's going to be in the front. If, you know, the cleric, you know, when shit goes down, they're going to be in the back. Like, that kind of influences the shared space.
Is that imaginary, or is that a static, like, definition of the character? You know,
but that's a definition of the class, and that's something that Cypher System doesn't have.
Yeah.
Cypher System has
you know what I mean? Like, I view that more as a static definition of the cleric is supposed to heal people.
But that's what I'm saying.
That's not really a shared group thing.
But I'm saying,
this is what my role in the party is.
Well, see, that's what I'm saying. This is what I think what I was getting to is the fact that, you know, you look at D&D, you know, and the classes are, like you said, they're static. In Cypher System, they're not. They're archetypal ideas. They're archetypical ideas or archetypical ideas. So that being said, it is those other aspects that push us into that visual acuity or that ideology. That's how, because I kind of like the way he put it, because that's how I see it. You know,
that's what I was getting at, basically. Like, the effort, the edge, it kind of leads us to a certain mindset about the character. If you happen to know those numbers about another person's character, it kind of like, hey, they have good int edge. They have a certain ability. Like, hey, they're the face of the group. It kind of molds that perspective of them in the imaginary space, even if they might not be playing the face or whatever, or might not be how they're presenting their character. It might change someone's perspective on their character based on those numbers.
That makes sense. Are there any other mechanics you guys could think of that actually facilitate the imaginary space?
Not too much other than like, stuff that's present in most RPGs, like helping one another, like, like that helping others rule or whatever.
Well,
You get to
somebody,
narratively cooperate with another character to change how a scene is going because you're helping them in some way. And basically any mechanic where two players interact usually changes the shared imaginary space because now they have to describe how they're helping each other.
I know one that we haven't touched on, and that was um the connections.
I was just about to say, 'cause you made me think about it. When you said anymore, I was going to go, remember our talk about optional rules and stuff?
Yeah, I think connections actually is an optional rule. It's in
Built
character
in,
creation.
yes.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the key components because it forces everyone to think about not only their own character in character creation, it forces you to think about how do your character relates to the other characters in the party. And then there's no more shared imaginary space than having to come up with concepts and ideas of how all your guys relate to each other and how does that affect the narrative in the beginning of the story. I think that's probably the biggest shared narrative imaginary space mechanic in the entire game. Because before the game even starts, you're already imagining together in character creation. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. When we start working on a game, right? I'm gonna have to be like send Dean a text. Hey, can I play your little brother?
Right.
And Dean now has the right to say, no, you can't play my little brother, but why don't you play my little cousin? Because I have an idea for my family's dead. Right. You understand? So we're building the narrative together before the game even starts. We're already imagining.
That's definitely
like we did with the Sky High one shot. That was actually pretty cool to build the backgrounds, with each other and with some of the NPCs, which added a huge element to playing high school students, with superpowers.
So now you guys are all already, before the game is even started, you have this whole imaginary world like built prior to the GM even saying one word. You know what I mean?
Well, if that's the case, then you know what? It's not so much a Cypher System mechanic, but it's a mechanic that's come about, or an ideology that's come about of recent years, and that's our session zeros. Session zeros are definitely a shared imaginary space builder, because you define aspects of the world, you define aspects of the game that's going to be played in general, along with everything else that you do. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good thing, even for like the one shot that I'm doing for Tallest, I actually did a session zero, and hopefully, next week it'll happen the way it's supposed to. But yeah, this is great.
I'm actually working on a dungeon crawl for Tolus. I'm excited.
Well, I want to play.
I got like 20 napkins still in my suitcase of ideas and.
Like you said, my Tolus adventure is it's like half dungeon crawl and a little bit in the city, if everything works out, about a 3-hour run. It's pretty cool though. I mean, Tolus has ignited some old imagination and old feelings here.
So I think we kind of touched on a lot of the imaginary, shared imaginary space. First of all, just to reiterate what we said at the very beginning of this, if you haven't read the article, please do. As a matter of fact, go back and read the 4 articles prior to that, because they all connect to one another. So, I mean, and Monte Cook, I always said he got the illest pen game in the industry. So definitely check out his work. But the last thing is, we talked about the narrative style, right? But are there any precise how important do you think precise mechanics now? We talked about those narrative mechanics that build on, imaginary spaces. How about those hardcore encoded mechanics that make the game run? The glue that holds the game together. Are there any of those mechanics that you absolutely need in your Cypher game?
In a Cypher
Well,
game, I
I mean,
don't think so. And in such a way that, again, if I do need it, I include it in the way that I mentioned before with those general area like maps and whatnot. But when they're
See, I consider effort and edge. It falls into that category, right?
I think they can fall in both categories. I can see that. I would say that the baseline mechanic of Cypher, which sets it apart from other things, having just a difficulty roll. You're not looking at something quantifiable on character sheets, and I think that's the thing that breaks it apart. The other thing that makes Cypher work so well, and I think it's something that's encoded, is the fact that NPCs are not made like player characters. That is huge.
That's a precise mechanic
Right.
because it works with every NPC, no matter what setting or genre
Exactly.
or Cypher system you work with.
Exactly.
Like the idea that what I was leading at with this question is that the idea that Cypher system doesn't have is like loosey goosey, wild wild west is just not the.
It's not true.
Resource management, that's a precise mechanic. That's why I think effort and edge falls on that category, is because abilities, effort always costs 3 unless you have a edge that drops it down. It's a precise number. It stays the same. The second level effort always costs 2. It doesn't change. There's no way you could finagle around that without using another mechanic to justify it. That's why I think those are precise mechanics.
And it's funny that you even bring that stuff up, because I've watched, we've all watched and read so many times when people want to rebuild the Cypher mechanics. Oh, how will Cypher work with a D6? Or let's try with a D12, let's do this, and you're going, why don't you just go play a game with a D6?
Claire brought up another great point. Iotum and Numenera are precise mechanics. Drafting is a precise mechanic.
If you look at it, if you want to go from that aspect, then yeah, if you look at all of like those additional ideas, crafting, if you look at what's your game? Predation. You look at Predation, companions, because somebody else at the table is your companion, and how the companions interact, and how.
Well, actually, companions is shared narrative.
No, it's definitely a shared narrative, but I'm saying, but how they operate is a precise ideology. But it's a shared narrative for you guys to get into sync. Yeah. So it's like double entendre.
Well, I totally forgot about the companion. That's definitely a shared imaginary space mechanic.
Oh, because communities.
Yeah, communities. Yeah, there's a lot of great ones. I think we touched on this. What do you guys think?
And one last thing. Okay. One last thing we forgot to bring up that is definitely a precise mechanic. Power shifts or divine shifts, or something that we all enjoy.
Yeah, it's well defined. It's the same across the board.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what they do, how they operate. So
as
far as this talk is concerned, I think we've hit it out the park, guys. I enjoyed it. Gave me some perspectives.
I'm sure in the chat tomorrow, people tell us everything we forgot, and we encourage that because we forget a lot of things. So if you missed anything or if you disagree with anything we said, put it in the chat as well, because we want to, these discussions are not about us knowing everything. This is about us just spewing out our thoughts into the internet and see what works.
And it also helps us get better. So thank you all. Everybody who watched and participated today. That was huge. And once again, we're sorry that we're a day late. But hopefully not $1 short. And next week, get ready for Tallest. We're going to be talking Tallest on a grand scale. We're all excited about being able to run something. So, I'm probably going to run my.
Just to define it a little further, we will do a full walkthrough and review of Tallest in multiple episodes you know, we'll probably do the first 2 or 3 chapters next week, and then we'll finish up the book the following week. We're also planning to start up our Thursday night live streams. We currently have 2 or 3 GMs scheduled. We just got to work out those details, but we're going to start streaming Wednesdays and Thursdays. Thursdays will be our actual plays with GM roulettes plus a ton of guest GMs. I know we have Malfectious, Samuel, Claire on deck to be running us some cool actual plays, and we're going to get some other people. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Absolutely. And of course, we're all got, you know, the 3 of us are going to do some tallest one shots. And if more than, you know, more people want in, of course, we'll run them multiple times.
Did you just imply that I'm going to do one too? Because I haven't even cracked my book yet, my guys. No.
Oh, you're going to do one. I feel great about you.
I was just joking around.
Well, I imply that you're going to do one. No, I just said you're going to do one. Of course you're doing one. And you can't argue about it. So, guys, any other final thoughts? Because I've said all that I have to say.
Nah,
about
You like Cypher Unlimited and you like what we do, you know, give us a follow here, and or if you can, subscribe on Twitch. If not, you know, like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel. We really appreciate it. We're trying to bring our subs up there. Like we always say, our videos will always be free no matter what, but you could donate a little bit to Ko-fi if you want. It helps us out with little things like Zoom course, or go to our online store and get this cool Cypher Unlimited swag like this hat I got on. You know, we got mugs, masks, all sorts of crazy crap over there. You can go.
And now Pride Designs.
Yeah. Join our Facebook group. You know, we talk about all things Monte Cook games there. We laugh, we have a good time. Last but not least, join the largest fan-run Cypher System Monte Cook games fan-run site on Discord. We have close to 4,000 members where the games being run and played almost daily. You know, and we have chat discussions about every game that Monte Cook games met, every setting. You know, Numenera the Strange, Predation, Tolless. You know, what? No Thank You Evil, Invisible Sun, whatever they have, we have chat rooms talking about it. And like I said, there's like 4,000 people on there. So you could chat from all different time zones. So we'll love to see you there. And yes, all 3 of us are on there. You could message us. I'm on there all day long. So you could chat with me, chat with Al, chat with Dean, and get in the game with us. That's the best way to game with us because we run all our games on that Discord.
Absolutely.
Last but not least, we love you guys.
Yep. And yeah, thank you guys so much for stopping by. It's been a blast as usual. We'll have this up on YouTube tomorrow for those who have missed it. I know Rule of Lore said they need to catch the VOD, so you know they'll catch it on YouTube. Hopefully others will as well. And yeah, thank you again. And from us at the CU, we will see you later.